Great, welcome everyone to NCSL's virtual education meeting. My name is Michelle Ekstrom and I direct our education program in our Denver office. Today we are so pleased to be focusing on the issue of higher education. We know a lot of you have a lot of questions about what is the status of things and what do we know about what to expect coming up, and try to get your questions answered so that you can make some decisions as you move forward to finalize this legislative session and head into your next legislative session. Today we have with us Scott Jaschik and Sunny DA, who is our higher education expert. Before we get started, I just wanted to run through the protocol for today's virtual meeting. We want to make sure that you join by video rather than phone so that you can take full advantage of viewing the slides. And also, we'd love it if you turn your video cameras on so that we can see you and it feels more like an in-person meeting. We would also ask that you add your full name to your tile as well as your state or the organization you represent so that we know for security purposes who is joining our meeting. Please make sure you mute your lines unless we ask you to unmute them to share questions that you might have or just a situation that's going on in your state. You can also feel free to virtually raise your hand to be recognized today by Sunny, or you can type your questions into the chat box, which is typically on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a reminder to please not share your screen under any circumstances for security purposes. And also another reminder that this meeting is recorded and it is posted on our website as well as our YouTube channel, NCSL's YouTube channel. And we also post all materials related to the virtual meeting as well. So you can find everything you need using that link that's down there at the bottom of your screen. So I am going to introduce Sunny Day, who is our program director who oversees our work on higher education, and she will take it from here.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michelle. I'm Sunny Day. I work with NCSL's post-secondary team out of our Denver office, and also on the line today are my colleagues Marilyn Villalobos and Andrew Smalley, as well as our DC Federal Committee Director, Austin Reed. So we welcome your questions in the chat box, and we will address them throughout this hour. We've titled this virtual meeting, Higher Education in Crisis, because there are so many unknowns. For example, will students return in the fall? What are liabilities to campuses if they close or if they don't? What will happen to students who need to transfer or who need to stop temporarily? And I wanted to mention that it's important also to understand the demographics of today's students. The students who are accessing higher education now, nearly half of undergraduate students attend community colleges. Almost 40% of today's higher ed students are working adults. So as you might imagine, these students are now facing additional challenges that are already challenges during normal times, like access to childcare and transportation and food and housing, and above all, affordability. We know that the average cost of higher education has increased greatly, and we are seeing the impact of record level student loan debt on state economies and the financial security of citizens and non-families. And then, in these times, we can all acknowledge that the world has changed and will continue to change in higher education. We're going to see certainly increasing financial burden and stress for institutions. We are seeing concerns about the comfort level of students returning to higher ed, reflected in their first-time FAFSA applications as well as those for returning students. And for you all, state policymakers, more than anything that we need a strong variety of short-term, high-quality credentials that can get people right back into the jobs that are needed in your state economies. So with that, I'm very excited to get started on today's call. We have a speaker who follows education policy trends across the states and among higher education institutions, who can speak to some of the challenges facing states and institutions and systems, and perhaps shed some light on the areas where state legislators should continue to focus their attention in this very fast-moving environment. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Scott Jaschik, editor of one of the founders of Inside Higher Ed. Scott is a leading voice on higher education issues. He's quoted regularly in publications nationwide. He publishes articles on colleges in publications such as the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. He's also served as editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And needless to say, Scott is well versed in all of the issues you're confronting right now as state policymakers in the arena of higher education. Scott, some of the concerns we've raised to date have included financial security for students, transferability among institutions as students need to move due to the pandemic, and new data that I mentioned showing that FAFSA rates are substantially down for both new and returning students. I know these are on your mind too, and I'm looking forward to hearing what other issues you might flag as needing immediate attention in what really is a crisis time for higher education. So Scott, thanks again for being here. I'll let you take over, and we will continue to keep our eye on that chat box throughout and continue to pose questions to you.
Thank you so much for your introduction, and welcome to all of you to this program. First off, I want to say that the title of Higher Education in Crisis is not an exaggeration. It is in crisis right now. Higher ed has never moved as quickly and as broadly as it did in getting the students to go home. Higher ed mobilized massively to do this, and that's great. They needed to do it, so it's great that they did it. But what happens now? What are the questions? And as I can see some of your questions in the chat box. The first and most important question, I think, is, will the students come back? The FAFSA, the statistics that Sunny cited suggest that there are not going to be as many students as there were in the past. And there have been a series of polls. Most of the polls have been of traditional age students, while the FAFSA should pick up all trends. And they suggest that it's not going to be the same. Students are not as excited about online education as they are about in-person education. And also, students who are going far from home are now looking at places close to home if they're looking at all. Now, what do you make of the fact that a lot of colleges are announcing that they're going to be back? All is going to be well. And they're going to enroll. We see this in Texas, a lot of colleges. I don't know if we have any Texans here, but a lot of colleges are saying they're going to come back. Other colleges are saying not so fast. If you want, I just saw a great explanation from Assumption College today about why they can't say if they're going to be back. And I think that's probably an honest answer. They don't know. Now, why don't they know? The American College Health Association released a guide for how can colleges prepare to come back. And among other things, they said to operate efficiently in an on-campus environment, you need to have access to a lot of testing of students. Do they have coronavirus? You need to have a system for contact tracing, which means for every student who is found to have coronavirus, you need to immediately be able to determine who they had, who they were exposed to. And you need to have separate rooms in isolation for those who are isolated. Now, this would be impossible, in my opinion, at a large university with many, many students, and most public universities are large. I'm looking at, we've got Colorado, Oregon, Virginia, New Mexico, Georgia here. You have some smaller colleges and certainly some small private colleges, but most of your colleges are large, and that's really difficult. If you want to think about the fact that, you may be afraid to fly in an airplane, well, why should you not be afraid to go in a large lecture room where there are lots and lots of students? Colleges in this environment are just going to be very much exposed to other people's diseases. And it's not just coronavirus. Campus is a great way to spread anything. And students do spread disease every year, but it's not as dangerous as coronavirus. Now, I know that some of you are saying, well, students aren't a high-risk group. Now, first of all, that's debatable because a lot of students have been dying or getting coronavirus. But the faculty are a high-risk group, or at least some of them are by age, by diseases that they have had or conditions that they have. They are a high-risk group. So I'm not saying that colleges will not reopen. I'm just saying to reopen responsibly, they've got a lot to do. And this leads to a question, actually, from Matt Golden to everyone. How do you bring back students to urban campuses? And in an urban campus, I think it's particularly hard. In New York City, I think it's going to be particularly hard. In New York City, people accept that a lot of students are just in an environment where everyone's around. But for dealing with coronavirus defense, it's not a good environment. And it's not a surprise that Governor Cuomo and that the New York legislature have not set a quick date for New York City, especially to reopen. The other thing that I want to mention about New York State is a lot of the funding is not the only decision. There are private colleges in New York State that also need the state's okay to reopen. And I give you an example of Wells College. They are a private college in the Finger Lakes region, beautiful college. They're a very small college, 500 students. They could probably function with social distancing. But they need to reopen. And Wells has said that if the state doesn't give them permission to reopen, they will close permanently because they depend on the room and board fees from students to operate. And so this just goes to show that you can be urban or rural. You've got a big problem in whether or not you can reopen. And I think in particular, it's going to be some of the small, poor, private colleges that are not going to survive. And that leads me to the next question: who will survive? And who is in danger? McMurray College is closing. It's a small college. Urbana University is closing. They are a branch of Franklin University, which isn't closing. But my point is only that there are numerous small colleges that are going to close. We've been in a period of time when small colleges have been in danger, but the coronavirus epidemic has made it just impossible for many small colleges to function and to survive. And I think we're going to see more of them close in the next month. Now, what about larger public universities? I don't think are going to close, most of them, but I think they're going to be under pressure to either in some states, the governors are going to want them to reopen, and in some states, the governors are going to want them to close, to close for the time being. And I think this is one of the key questions for legislators. How do you get involved in encouraging colleges to either open or not? Now, I do not claim to be Dr. Fauci or have insights into the public health questions. But I think that an important thing is in whatever state you are in, to please, please talk to the public health experts in the state and listen to them. Do not listen to the football coaches who are telling you that you have to, football boosters, I should say, who are telling you you have to play football. Maybe it's safe, but I am doubtful. And you need to get an honest discussion going about what is possible. And that's the key thing, is that when the campuses are shut down, how are you going to make it possible? Now, there's a question here, is the NCAA not going to come up with a nationwide policy on that? Well, in theory, they will, but look at what the NCAA president said recently. He said, if there aren't all the students on campus, we won't play sports. You can't just bring the athletes back or just bring the athletes and a few students back. So what is going to happen if on some campuses you have students and on others you don't? What's going to happen if on some campuses you do not have permission for fans to watch games? If you didn't see the proposal of the baseball owners, they are proposing evidently that we play a year without any fans. How is that going to function? And that's going to be a really key question. I'd say I want to get to your questions, but I just want to say a few things about what I think legislators need to do first. Above all, legislators need to be aware that the colleges getting the most money from Congress are not the colleges that serve the most low-income students. Community colleges have been disadvantaged in that system, despite the fact, as you heard in my introduction, that they educate nearly half of all students and cost less and may enroll more as more students look to go closer to home. Now, that's because of the formulas used, but you need to ask yourself, as you're looking at these questions, is that appropriate? Then you need to ask yourself, am I doing what the people are telling me to do, or am I doing the right thing? I think you may be called on to do unpopular things. Look, every student wants to go back. You know, you can't blame them. They want to go back. Every parent wants the students to go back. And maybe they can, or maybe some can. But the environment is such that we don't know that, and we won't know it for a while. And so I think it's really going to be essential that you be brave and do the right thing, regardless of whether it is popular or not. And that's really the main thing I wanted to say, is that you've got to really, talk to people about what's necessary. Now I want to turn to some of these questions. Students in off-campus housing often did not get prorated refunds. That's correct. They are concerned about committing to come back if school may be shut down again. I would say they should be concerned. The prorated refunds for room and board were either encouraged or required by many states or by the colleges. And so but the colleges have no control over off-campus housing. Now, you may have some control. I don't know if it's you or the localities in your states, but that's very tough to legislate about. And so I think students in off-campus housing were really screwed, pardon my language, and then really have to be careful about what they want to do. Let's see, are there other, Sunny, would you suggest some questions in particular? I can't hear you.
I know, sorry.
Okay.
Well, we're talking about what institutions can do for example, the off-campus housing students, or students who are less affluent. So what is the latest on schools giving those dollars directly to students, and is that having an impact at all?
The money from room and board?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was referring to like the federal CARES money that's supposed to
yes.
Institutions
so
going directly to students.
Most institutions are giving that back mainly to their Pell Grant students. Pell Grant students were favored in the formula. The reason that, and so you'd think, oh, well, great, that's great for community colleges. They educate so many students who are Pell eligible. But you had to be a full-time student to count. And many community colleges enroll very few full-time students. So the community colleges did not do well. But yeah, those who have it are giving it back. But I think it's important to remember it's going to be a fraction of, that's going to cover a fraction of student costs, and the money that the colleges received is just a fraction of the college's costs.
Another thing I wanted to mention, and again, I encourage everyone to keep asking your questions in the chat box, or feel free, please, to unmute yourself and just ask your questions directly. But one of the things that we were talking about before the pandemic hit was closures already, or mergers, and kind of already a sense that there may be too many campuses and maybe duplicating services. Certainly efficiency is something we've been talking about for a while. And so there was that big story in the news from Massachusetts where a small campus closed pretty late in the spring and really didn't give folks a heads up, or the state policymakers, or kind of, it was a surprise to everyone. And yes. So we've already been talking about Massachusetts' approach, and we do have a legislator on the line from Massachusetts if we want to ask him questions about that. But what do you think maybe some other things that legislators ought to be thinking about, if anything, at the state policy role?
Sure. Well, the key issue in Massachusetts, and there was legislation that got watered down on this, is how much do you have to inform students that you might close, or that all is not well? And this is a very tricky issue, because every college president, when they're lobbying the legislature, they may think they're going to close, but then they go out and tell students, oh, well, please enroll. It's going to be wonderful here. And they can't simultaneously do both, or it's hard for them to do both. The thing that is different in Massachusetts and nationally, two things. One, the colleges in danger in Massachusetts are small private colleges. And they are in danger in the rest of the United States too, but very small and private, under 1,000 students, no meaningful endowment. That's who's in danger. Now, the question now is going to be, will public colleges take the same approach? In Georgia, for instance, Georgia's become like the king of mergers. They have been merging colleges for a few years, but their mergers don't shut a campus. They combine two colleges that are relatively close together physically and have a single president, but they aren't shutting campuses. I think the big question is whether we'll see shutting of campuses. Now, in Vermont, there was a proposal to close 3 campuses, or parts of 3 campuses, and it got withdrawn. There was so much opposition to it. The problem is, if you are a state, a college is an important economic resource to the people who live near it. It has nothing to do with education, but they depend on the college for you know, everything really. In some small college towns, they're the main employer, the main, you know, social hub, and they're going, and so they're going to be very, very insistent that they not close. The thing that may force the issue, and no one's advocating for college closures, is that if the states need to cut budgets by so much, then they might look at closures. But you don't want to do that if you don't have to.
Do you think?
I want to comment on something that's in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
It says the right thing seems to be quite the subject. And I agree. The right thing may seem, you know, like an obvious thing. You know what's right. But it's not. You know, what's right depends on how much money you have, depends on whether you can adequately finance colleges. You know, I think states hurt colleges when they fund them at levels that are inappropriate, frankly. Funding for mediocrity is not necessarily a good thing, and yet that may seem the right thing to do. And so you really need to think about how are you going to fund minimal levels, and also important is how are you going to serve the students? Minority students, first generation students, go to community colleges, go to regional public universities that do not get as much money as flagship state universities. The flagships have endowments, they have other sources of money, they can admit lots of out-of-state students, so they're going to be in a better position. Now, they're in bad shape too. I don't want to say anyone's in good shape, but there's a real tricky balancing act there.
I want to open it up to others to ask questions, so I'll pause for a couple of seconds, but I do actually have some other questions too. You know, and I'll just mention them briefly, that there's a lot of conversation around efficiency and sort of what policies might support community colleges in this environment, right? And some questions about whether they should be offering any four-year degrees and or replicating other programs that maybe are accessible. Have you seen anything that you think is of interest that you would want to comment on that arena?
Quite a lot is going on with community colleges that I think you should be paying attention to. Community colleges, in some ways, by the nature of the word community, tend to obstruct the concept of, well, efficiency. Well, we've got 4 community colleges in our state, and they all are teaching a program in X, so let's just combine them. Well, people value community colleges for being able to go someplace really close, and they want to be able to go there. Now, if they're online, obviously you can do more, and but community colleges have a tricky record with online enrollment. On the one hand, they do it and they welcome online students, but some at-risk students tend not to do well with community colleges online. Let me give you an example. This semester, when many community colleges, when everyone has gone online, community colleges have kept their parking lot hotspots working because students drive there or go there in the evening so that they can log on to the internet. Now, wealthier students at the flagships may not be able to drive to their campus, but they're going to be in a place where at home they can get the internet access. Community college students do not have that. Community college students also don't have necessarily have a good computer to work on. for many poor students, and poor I mean low income, not poor performers, the phone is their device. And you need to think about that. You know, I love my phone, but I wouldn't want to do it to take a course on my phone. And that's why a lot of colleges have been giving community college students laptops to use. So, you know, it's just a real mess. But on the 4-year degree, some community colleges, particularly in Florida, really has taken off, have moved into 4-year degrees. The difference is the reception of 4-year colleges in Florida, public and private, has been wonderful. They've said, please go for it, because they don't have enough space for their students. But in Michigan, when they tried, the 4-year colleges organized against it. So it really depends where you are, how likely that is to happen. Looks like some good questions came in regarding the question on higher education impact on teacher prep. There's been a significant effect challenge to get teachers in the program trying to complete requirements such as licensure exams and/or student teaching completed. We have an upcoming meeting that will focus on the issue. So here's what I'd say. You need to show flexibility, but you also need to assure that your standards are still met. And how to do that, I cannot tell you. But the flexibility is in, you know, how do you prove that you are capable is so important. Most states have tighter regulation of teacher prep than they have had in previous years. And I would say if states should not wipe the slate clean, but they might find some ways to temporarily loosen up some regulations to let people teach. But I would be very, very careful in doing that. I've read some articles from Inside Higher Ed that study abroad program providers may be going out of business from this too. Can you discuss the future of study abroad providers? Okay, this is a huge mess, because even if states open their colleges and universities, and if private colleges and universities open for business in the fall, study abroad is pretty much dead for the fall. I do not think most students or most parents will look at study abroad in the fall. People who were abroad during this spring semester were rushed home. I had a niece who was rushed home from Spain when the virus broke there. And it's a big mess. You know, she's home and taking courses and whatever, but it's not what she wanted. But study abroad generally is going to be very badly hurt. And these companies are laying off massive numbers of people. They are shutting down their programs. Now, I believe that study abroad will be back. Study abroad is an important part of a college education, or of many people's college education. It's going to be, you know, it's going to come back. But there may be a period of time when it's not. And I think it's important for colleges to think about how are they going to preserve the fact that college, for many students, is a place where they interact with students from all over the world. Colleges in the fall, well, one, they may not be in session, but even if they are in session, they're not going to be getting students from abroad, or not be getting new students from abroad. So it's more important than ever that colleges be international in some sense, that they can be. Can you comment on the litigation that schools are facing regarding grading, regarding refunds, value of online learning, etc.? There are many suits have been brought. It's too early to say who's going to win. I tend to think that in most cases, the colleges are going to win the suits over this semester. My stress is on this semester. Colleges weren't scheming to come up with some sort of way to rip off their students, and they had to convert. Now, a college that refuses to give anything back to its students may well have to give something back, but I don't think a college that gave back some but not all of the room and board is going to be in that serious trouble. But that ends now. The coming semesters, I think parents are going to look very carefully at what's in the contracts, and students are going to look very carefully at what's in the contracts. So they're going to really care and be much more prone to get a lawsuit. A question about competency assessments. This is so important. One of the big trends in higher education in the last 5 to 10 years, and many of you have no doubt been involved in it, has been the move toward assessment in higher education. And that's been on the whole, very good. Colleges have to prove that they are doing something. Now, what happens when colleges immediately evacuate and they can't do an assessment, and even their testing, they have to teach pass fail and so forth. Here again, I think this semester people are going to cut colleges a bit of a break. They're going to accept that colleges can't do everything, or at least they certainly can't do everything with no notice. But it's going to be next semester. I just saw that Cal State, a mammoth system, says they're going to probably teach most classes online in the fall. If that happens, I don't think they're going to be able to wipe the slate clean as they were this semester. Other questions?
Where do you think, I'm sorry, hold on. Actually, I did have one. Okay, I'm going to read this. I worry about the impact of critical wraparound services being cut that are exactly what our most vulnerable students need to be successful and complete their program, especially in the community colleges.
You're right to worry. And I hope that you ask a lot of questions about that because they are so essential. A student who is a wealthy student who just graduated from high school is going to be fine. They're going to be miserable at home, but they're going to get back and they're going to be fine. A community college student may not have a home to go back to, may have an uncomfortable home to go back to where there is not the same support. And I think that if that happens, well, that is happening, it's essential to provide the services. Now, it's very important to note, services can continue when from afar. Centers of counseling can do work from afar. Academic advising can go on from afar. But you need to make sure that this is recognized and supported by your legislatures. Testing is a huge concern. What are you hearing about the availability of testing and who will pay for it? Yes, that is a huge concern. I mean, it relates to this semester. A lot of colleges went pass fail, and a lot of professors, took the opportunity to sort of go easy on the students. And, I can't blame the professors for going easy on students. They had to undergo a major change in very little time. Not the question, testing for COVID this fall. Okay, testing for COVID. The key questions are tests going to be available for all students to come back. And not just students showing symptoms, but all students. And right now, in many communities, I do not think there is a positive answer to that question. I've not been tested for COVID. I don't know how your legislatures are, whether maybe you have been tested for COVID, but I don't know if the testing apparatus in the United States right now is up to the task.
Do you think that another area state legislatures should continue to focus on is transferability? So as students are moving among campuses, are you still hearing that this is both a sort of interstate and intrastate ongoing concern?
Yes, I mean, and particularly right now, if, as some people think, now just some people think this, many students will go to a community college in the fall and not go to the places they were supposed to go to. If this happens, or just regularly, because many community college students would be great students to transfer to a four-year institution, there's gonna be pressure to make sure the courses count. And, you know, community college transfer is something that people say they are doing right. And everyone says they're doing it right. But if really community college transfer works well, there should be a lot more four-year degrees from a student going 2 years at a community college, 2 years at a four-year college. That is very hard to do. And so I think there will be pressure to check on that. What are you hearing about reconnecting adult workers who are underemployed, unemployed to higher education? This is one of the most important questions because we have, I think, 33 million unemployed people. And actually, we just have 33 million people filing for unemployment. There are more people who are unemployed. This is a great opportunity, I hate to say it, for higher education. Higher education historically has done well in times when there's a lot of people who are unemployed. But an unemployed person does not want to spend a lot of money on tuition. An unemployed person maybe has a part-time job and doesn't want the expectation that he or she is a full-time worker. So I think it's a great area, especially for community colleges and colleges that are you know, in urban areas, but I'm not yet convinced it'll go well. Other questions?
Are there other folks who would like to ask questions and or speak up? Feel free.
Yes, Sonny, this is Chuck. Chuck Martin from Georgia. Am I there?
Great to see you, yes.
Yeah, good to be seen. We were quarantined after our legislative session, so haven't been out much. No, serious question for Scott. Georgia was one of the places in around the country that didn't go to pass-fail. There's some student consternation on that. There was an article, I think, recently in the Wall Street Journal that applauded the Board of Regents for doing that. For those that don't know, that our college system is constitutionally separated from the legislature, so that's entirely up to the Board of Regents. It seems, I'll preface the question with a statement and tell me if this is true, but it seems many people jump quickly to the pass-fail, and now they don't know how they're going to deal with that for transferability or for going into a graduate level program, whereas the university system stayed with letter grading and is currently and is going to in the future monitor demonstrative issues where a student had connectivity issues, had various issues that came up that may have damaged an otherwise good academic career. Have you had any conversations, or do you know of any conversations around the country? There are some graduate programs that will not take a pass-fail in a class that should have had a letter grade. Are those discussions being had any place? What's your theory on pass-fail versus hanging in there and learning. We felt like, I believe in Georgia, that if you let the students go home in March and a 70 was the same as a 99, there wouldn't have been near as much learning.
You know, Georgia took a very principled position on this, and they probably are not the most popular with the students, but the administrators cheered them on. I think in states where most of the colleges went to pass-fail, there have been efforts started that will lead graduate schools to admit some students to some programs with pass-fail for this semester. Typically, pass-fail is something you can only take in a few courses, not a whole semester's courses. So I think that there are going to be efforts to make it possible. I would not expect it to be the same in med school or maybe law school. And so students have had to make a choice. That, you know, in most systems that went pass-fail, it was the student's choice whether to go pass-fail, and some students, you know, didn't. But they will have to do it. And also there's the same issue for high school students. High schools are also going pass-fail, and many colleges are going to have to look at transcripts with more pass-fail grades than they're used to. My guess, and it's just a guess, is that if students have an overall record that shows them to be a good fit for a college, the college will let them in. But my assumption is that after this semester, they're going to go back to letter grades. And I don't know if that's true.
No, thank you, Scott. And just a quick follow-up. That was the conversation I've had with some students, since it was an opt-in that was requested at the university system and is available around the country. My assumption is if you opt in for a pass-fail, you were going to get a C. And I was fearful that if students went that way, that was how it would be viewed. So I guess it's like I mentioned earlier, the right thing is always subjective. This is
yes,
how it's
indeed.
dealt with, not necessarily how it's recorded. Not as if that everybody in the world doesn't realize spring semester of 2020 was an anomaly into everyone's academic career.
Yeah, and that's important to remember, that whatever a student's average was before, you have to expect some effect of the work from home. Even a student who was better than a C might have had issues at home. So that's why they offered it. A statement, really, certificate programs might be helpful for adult ed rather than 2+2 degrees, absolutely. And many colleges, community colleges, and four-year institutions have a range of certificate programs to consider.
Thanks, because I have to go to a call with our governor here at 4 o'clock, so I'll be dropping soon. But thanks so much, Sonny, for you guys putting this together for us.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and maybe we have one waiting.
Hello? Julie?
Okay, great. We're kind of at the end of our time, and I'm thinking folks will start to hop off. So we will, we'll go forward. I have to say, Scott, that you touched on everything that's on all of our minds. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to give legislators a chance to ask questions about what's on your minds. We here at NCSL very much want to help you through the questions that are ahead of you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you have questions for Scott, I can always make that connection as well. What a pleasure, Scott, always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Michelle. I know you wanted to mention a few last minute details. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was really great. That answered a lot of my questions, and I hope it answered a lot of yours too. And if you think of additional questions, please feel free to email me or Sunny, and we can pass those along to Scott and try to get those questions answered for you. Just wanted to remind you of the virtual meetings that we have coming up. We are going to continue our series through the end of June, and we have some really great discussions coming up for you. On Friday, we're going to be focusing on the issue of distance learning. I know this was starting to come up a little bit in the questions. So we are going to have an entire virtual meeting focused on distance learning in the higher education space. And we hope that you will join us on Friday for that. These meetings are always at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And then we're going to pivot a bit and focus over the next couple of meeting opportunities on the issues around student mental health. That one will be on Tuesday, May 19th. And then on Tuesday, May 26th, we're going to focus on this much discussed issue of learning loss. How much learning loss do we really think we're going to have? And what approaches are states or districts taking to summer learning so that we can come up with ideas or ways to reach students over the summer to stem some of that learning loss. As you will notice, we're taking off Friday, May 22nd, since that is the Memorial Day weekend. And then we have a whole list of other virtual meetings planned for you that will focus on issues that we've been asked a lot about and that we know that you want to hear about. So we will continue these virtual meetings through the end of June and hope that you will join us for all of them, or if you're not able, please feel free to visit the recordings of them. That concludes today's meeting, and we will look forward to seeing you again on Friday.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.